and welcome to Living One. My name is Olivia Crossman. I'm your host. Living One is a monthly webinar series in which presenters from around the world share their vision for a future where all Earth beings live as one community in peace, dignity, and freedom. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? This last fall marked the beginning of Living One's 4th year, but today these conversations are more important than ever, for they are more than conversations. They are opportunities to build community, salve for the isolating wounds of our time. Today, we have the second session of our spring series, Earth Restoration and the Evolution of Human Consciousness. This series will explore the widespread calls to restore nature, who has suffered so egregiously over the past 500 years from colonizing human appropriation, destruction, and overpopulation. In light of recognition by many indigenous humans and Western science of animal and earth sentience, nature's restoration takes on a broader and deeper meaning. Over the next 5 weeks, we will hear the perspectives of 6 individuals who have dedicated their lives to earth restoration and expanding human consciousness. We are delighted to have you join us as we explore this important topic together. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Crulos Center for Nonviolence, located in Southern Oregon, is also the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, dakubedite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. To recognize the land is to recognize the lasting effects of colonization, genocide, and oppression that still impact indigenous communities today. But it is also an expression of gratitude and appreciation for the land and for all those whose homelands we live and work on. In the second of this 6-part series, we welcome Mike McCoy. Mike was born and raised in the Rocky Mountains in the 1940s and 50s when children could run freely and connect with nature. He has since worked to provide public service, protect wildlife, conserve land, safeguard the environment, and administer veterinary care for both wild and domestic animals for over 50 years. In addition to co-founding Project Wildlife to treat, rehabilitate, and release injured wildlife to their native habitats, Mike is also a founding member of the Southwest Wetlands Interpretive Association, dedicated to education in acquisition, preservation, and restoration of wetlands in Southern California. In addition to his vast ecological experience, Mike has also given discussions on the importance of incorporating meditation and mindfulness in daily life and how this encourages and motivates people to connect with other people, other species, the land, the planet, and beyond. Before we begin, let me share a few logistical notes. Mike will be speaking for 45 minutes, after which we will have 15 minutes for question and answer. In order to proceed in a timely manner, we ask that you please send your questions along in the chat during Mike's presentation, and we will read them out after he's finished. For anyone who isn't familiar with the Zoom chat function, if you move your cursor towards the bottom of your screen, you will see a number of icons appear, one of which is the chat function towards the center left of your screen. If you click on that, the chat will appear where you can type any questions or comments as we go. We do have 2 members of our Crulos community here with us today, Jenny and Deeksha, who will be monitoring the chat throughout our time together. Also, please note that the Zoom session will be recorded, so if you would feel more comfortable leaving your camera off or changing your Zoom name, please feel free to do so. Finally, we ask that unless you're currently speaking, you do keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. I have been a little under the weather this week, so we will have Gay interviewing Mike, and without further ado, we welcome Gay Bradshaw and Mike McCoy.
Thank you, Olivia, and hello, everyone. Probably this antedates most of everyone here, but there was this TV show when I was a kid called Romper Room, and the lady would pull up this mirror and look through, and she'd say, I see so-and-so, and I see so-and-so, and I see Ed and Mary and Sue and Isabella, and thank you all for being here. It's really a delight. Thank you, Olivia. Mike, again, and thank you for being here. I want to start off with, we usually do, is kind of getting everyone sort of in your vision or your beginning point with your arc, and your subtitle to your talk is A Handy Starter, where you talk about restoration, meditation, and medicine. I'm not sure that's the order. Can you use those points to just kind of give us an idea of your own arc and how you developed into who you are in this amazing integrated way?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to try to do that with the presentation, if that will work out okay. I'll start out with the restoration, and then a little bit on medical care for animals.
Yep, that's
Move
terrific.
into meditation and how that impacts our health and environment around us.
That's
Does that
terrific.
sound okay?
That sounds fantastic.
I see Ed and Mary are here. Well, I'm going to start by saying that the gold standard on this planet is life and living systems, and that life and living systems is that fabric that covers the planet from the highest to lowest point. It's thin, it's been mutilated, we've done bad things to it, and it's fragile and it's finite. And sometimes we don't think about that. And I think that more and more today, we need to change our priorities in the world and begin to rehabilitate the damage that we've done to this planet. And if we don't, we may put ourselves in an untenable situation, which we already are moving toward fairly rapidly, unfortunately. But I think, any human effort in technology that isn't in alignment with nature is a liability to everything. And so many things that we've done are not in alignment. I know when I was a kid, about 6 years old, I used to go with my dad to job sites and do things that I'd never do today. But he had me tamp dynamite after he said it. Well, I was raised in Boulder, Colorado, and Boulder had a new reservoir to the north of town, and they had to hook a water line from the reservoir to Boulder. And so my dad told me we had a job to do in the morning. Get up early, let's get going. The truck's loaded. We're gonna go to that site. So morning came and we went to the site. Well, we stopped at a very fabulous marsh, cattails, red-winged blackbirds. It was the spring of the year. It was alive. And I said, well, when are we going to the job site? He said, this is the job site. We got to drain this marsh and put that water line through here. I said, you can't do it. You have to put the water line to one side of the marsh or the other. Here I am, 6 years old, telling my dad how he's going to run his life. And we got in a pretty hefty argument. And then the crew came and they started doing their thing. And I said, I'm not going to help on this at all, and went to the truck and sat with my little dog. I always took the little dog with me to all the job sites. And well, long story short, the plunger came down, mud went everywhere, and the marsh went quiet. That was a turning point in my life at that age. It left an impression. I can still feel it today. Well, about that time, there was an astronomer in England. His name was Fred Hoyle, and he said, when a picture of the Earth is taken from the outside, there will be an idea let loose that will change the world. And in 1962, Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. And that book was probably one of the most important books ever written in the 20th century. And it started the environmental movement in the United States. Then in 1968, the Apollo 8 mission to the moon, the orbiting the moon, and on that mission and on that orbit, that picture that Hoyle was talking about was taken, Earthrise. You probably all remember that picture. And that was probably, environmentally, that was one of the most important photographs ever taken in the history of mankind. And it changed the nature of not only the United States, but the world toward the Earth. And it was that led to legislation immediately. It led to Earth Day. Earth Day was 1970. That was the 22nd of April, and that has persisted. And that all-important Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973, which I have had to use many times. And then the California Coastal Act, which I've always used too, was passed in 1976. Well, I graduated from veterinary school in 1970, and I had an internship at San Diego Zoo as a veterinary intern, and I worked with some of the greatest wildlife veterinarians at that time. They were pioneers in the field, and I worked with people like Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, other people that George Schaller was there. He was at the zoo in New York City. And then the IUCN people, I worked with them, International Union for the Conservation of Natural Resources. When animals were on the edge, we had discussions about it. We were working with animals on the edge. The golden lion marmoset, we were working on bringing that population back, the Arabian oryx, and then we had a breeding unit for cheetah at that time. I had the opportunity to work with animals from every continent in the world at that time, whether they were mammals or avian or reptilian or amphibian. We had that opportunity. Well, at the end of that internship, I had an offer from a veterinarian in the most southwesterly city in the United States to come down and practice with him. He was a theragenologist. His specialty was reproduction in animals. And so he did a lot of work at the zoo in reproductive physiology. And there, in this little town, there on the south side of town was the Tijuana estuary. And the Tijuana estuary is the largest estuarine system left in Southern California. 90% of the estuaries in California have been altered or destroyed. This estuary had been left untouched very much. And there were some changes, but it was in pretty good shape. To the north of town was San Diego Bay. San Diego Bay and the Tijuana estuary are a hot spot on the Pacific Flyway for migrating birds. We have about pretty close to 400 different species that utilize the area, either in migration or endemically for breeding and feeding and survival. I started in the practice there, and I did wildlife work at night, and I worked with domestic animals in the daytime, and I worked on the Tijuana estuary. So when I worked with domestic animals, the human-animal bond became preeminent. Boy, I'll tell you, I saw some things. I experienced things in life about that are very emotional. There's a beginning of life, the middle of life, and the end of life, and you have to deal with all of it all the time. It's constant. It's a new opportunity every day. The birth, the maintenance, and the death, and you have to deal with every part of that, and you have to deal with the owners on every part of that. And it's in some situations it's very tough, but it's very worthwhile. In the wildlife angle, I did the veterinary work on coyotes, bobcats, turtles, tortoises, birds, everything. And after the veterinary work was done, it went to the rehabilitation team, and we called that Project Wildlife, and it still is there today. it's going strong. And of course, I'm not there with it anymore, but I worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service on eagle recovery. I worked with an individual who used to go around the United States, and he'd bring it. His name was John Harris, and old John. I don't know. You maybe some of you do, John. He had wolves, Clem and Jethro, and he'd take them to schools all over the United States. When he'd come to Imperial Beach, he'd leave them with me, and I'd give them their annual physical. So, at any rate, I got wind shortly after I arrived in Imperial Beach that the fathers in the community, the mayor and the city council, wanted to put a marina in that estuary. And I was obviously pretty in a position of serious opposition. And I treated the animals for a lot of people that were for that marina. So that really, was a complex social situation for me. But there were a lot of people, there were about a third of the community wanted, about 2/3 wanted that marina. Well, we really got into that. There were a lot of death threats. One individual got shot. There were lug nuts loosened on the car wheels, and people, it was really tenuous. It was difficult. Well, I went to Washington, D.C., and I had an opportunity to meet with the Undersecretary of Interior at the time, and told him the situation. He said, you got to get the Fish and Wildlife Service involved. You got to acquire that estuary, and you got to get the Congress involved. So came back to Imperial Beach and started doing that. Worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service from that point on, worked with congressional leadership, and we went through the majority of that decade working on this. And by 1979, we had a small group of people, and we founded the Southwest Wetlands Interpretive Association, which was mentioned a little bit ago. And it was a 501c3, and we still use it today. We're involved with it. We do administrative and projects at the estuary and other areas in Southern California. And we were aimed at educating people about estuarine systems and protecting them and restoring them. It was a year later, 1980, and President Reagan had just been elected. Jimmy Carter was on his way out. President Reagan was not environmentally supportive. And we knew if we were going to do anything, we were hoping we could get something done before he came into power. And he already had Jim Watt, who many of you may have known. He was Secretary of Interior. And he was really one of the most difficult Interior secretaries environmentally we've ever had. And we got a call in 1980 after that election, in late November, from the Fish and Wildlife Service to meet with him at the estuary. And so we went down and met with him the next morning, and we were congregated, and a pickup truck pulled up, and a guy got out of it with a big Stetson hat and a rodeo belt buckle, and my wife called him the Marlboro Man, and I called him the bull rider. And he came over to the group and said, Patricia, Mike McCoy, we want you to meet Larry Dean, the refuge manager at the Tijuana Slough National Wildlife Refuge. That was an emotional moment. Never forget it. 10 years of this battle, people's lives threatened, and all of a sudden we're moving forward. We've protected that estuary. It was it was a great opportunity for us, and it was a tribute to the Tijuana estuary and the people who worked on it. The deed was transferred the 24th of December, Christmas Eve that year, just a few weeks on, and Christmas Day, that became the Tijuana National Estuarine, or Tijuana River, Tijuana Slough National Wildlife Refuge. And several weeks on from that, in January, we got a call from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and they wanted to meet with us. They wanted to include the Tijuana Estuary as a part of the National Sanctuary Program for NOAA. That sanctuary program today is known as the National Estuarine Research Reserve, and the estuary today is the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve. But at that time, it was a sanctuary. After hearings, we were one of four in the running, and after hearings, we were selected as the site to become NOAA's site. There were 9 of them at the United States at the time, on the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, and the Great Lakes. Today, there are 31 of those national reserves. And I
hesitate to interrupt, but I will. What was the magic? What happened? I mean, it was obviously this sort of miracle, although there was all this hard work and time that had been put in. What can you say about that?
Well, what really happened? Well, it was. Do you know about the Land and Water Conservation Fund? Or sort of? Yeah, I bet you do, because you probably use it. We had. When I met with the Undersecretary of Interior, there was a tie there with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and there was a tie with a congressional representative, Lionel Van Deerlin, and we all worked together, and that's how that was put together. And I mean, it was a close call. I didn't think we were going to make it. I really didn't, because you get in those situations, it gets pretty tight, especially when you're working with Congress. Because at that time, Congress was much more open to that. But nowadays, I don't think we could do it nowadays, because there's not an openness there that will allow the transfer of information and power to lead to something like this. Does that make sense? Or does that answer
Yeah.
So,
but nonetheless, it was extraordinary.
Well, it was. I don't think I'd want to try to duplicate that again. But at any rate, we held our first meeting as a reserve in January the next year, 82, and we've been meeting ever since, every quarter. And I still remain on the advisory group I've been on there 40 years. I'm probably going to get removed here. I'm getting too old for it, right, Ed? Anyway, not long after that, my wife and I went to England in 1985, and we met with Sir Peter Scott. Sir Peter Scott is the son of Scott of the Antarctic, and he was had the Wildfowl Trust at Slimbridge, England. And he started the World Wildlife Fund, among other things, and set this wildlife trust up. And he was head of the Ramsar program on international wetlands of international importance. And we wanted to join that. So when we came back to the United States, we worked for 20 years. And 3/4 of our watershed is in Mexico. And a quarter in the United States. So we have a direct tie with Mexico. And so in the 20 years we worked on that. And on Earth Day 2005, we dedicated the Tijuana Estuary as a Ramsar site under the direction of the Ramsar Convention, Wetlands of International Importance. People from the State Department came, and from the International Division of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their counterparts from Mexico. So it was a big deal. And then we built a visitor center right after that. Not long, about 2010, I was on a team that was working to put in marine protected areas along the coast of California. And we were working on Southern California. And I had worked with that team, and we got the Delta, the Tijuana River, designated as a state marine conservation area and protected there against commercial sport fishing and bait fishing. And so we were able to protect. There are big tern colonies along there, and they depend on those bait fish. So that helped protect that. And then we had all the protection on the estuary, and then we had the riparian corridor was protected clear to the international border. So the work had all paid off. And I'll say that the way that national estuarine system is set up, the 31 estuarine sanctuary, not the sanctuaries, but the national reserve system is set up so that we can do research to restore all areas on the Great Lakes, on the East Coast, on the Gulf Coast, and on the West Coast, Hawaii and Alaska. So we work on restoration of all those areas in the continental United States and outside the continental United States. And now with the Ramsar Convention, we do a lot of work in Mexico. We built a sewer treatment plant in Mexico from 83 to 94, an alternative sewer treatment plant. And so we had a seamless working reserve with the people in the government down there, and still do today. We have several projects going down there. Well, we started doing restoration. We did a lot of research at the estuary starting back in the 60s. Dr. Joy Zedler, who's an internationally known wetland research ecologist and restoration ecologist, now at the University of Wisconsin, worked there with us for years to get that research program going, which ended up guiding management, guiding education, guiding restoration. So that program has been very effective in all those areas. We started our first restoration project in 1985 to expand the tidal prism in the north end of the estuary. We did another one in 96 after we built the visitor center in the north end to tie this whole estuarine system together better, expand the tidal prism. And then we started working in the south part of the estuary to put in a 20-acre marsh down there. We called it the model marsh. And that was what we called the Tijuana Estuary Tidal Restoration Program. And we still work on that today. We started in 2000 and we're moving along on it today. We've done the first two parts of that. Now we're on the design review engineering. And the next step will be to put a shovel in the ground and start to put in an 81-acre marsh restoration, probably within 2 years. And then that'll go on. And the next step will be to put in a 200-acre restoration. The problem is we don't know what's going to happen with climate change and sea level rise, which will impact all our work as we move along. But that's well understood. At the same time, in 1978, we started working in the bay when we were working on the estuary with the Fish and Wildlife Service on San Diego Bay. And in 1999, we formed another San Diego Bay National Wildlife Refuge under direction of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in 2011, we restored a section of that wildlife refuge over in the southwest corner of the San Diego Bay, and we restored 240 acres. and brought it back to what it was over 100 years ago. It looks like an estuary, like it should look, and that was a big deal. Well, I think I'm going to move into the area of meditation, because I think that's a critical step in moving humanity forward to a new paradigm, I'll say.
And Mike, as you segue into that, or move into that, it still strikes me that this started when you were 6.
Yeah, started.
And there's kind of the parallel between restoration and this quote unquote external restoration. It's really quite extraordinary.
That event when I was 6 sort of set the die for my whole life ahead. I don't know, it had an impact on me throughout the whole thing, questioning civilization, the way people treated each other, the Native Americans, the treatment of Native Americans, the Great Plains, everything. It really just changed my life right there.
Well, it seems like that as you move into the meditation, maybe bring those threads in, because that's another extraordinary dimension to your experience.
Well, I will. I'll do. If I don't do it right, tell me and I'll reverse it. All right. So anyway, when I was at San Diego Zoo, I was working with the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, and Dr. Salk, known as Salk. I don't know if you probably all remember him. Polio vaccine.
Jonas Salk.
Dr. Salk was an extraordinary man, and we worked with him on a project, and we'd get off on discussing philosophy once in a while. And I said to him one day, why is it that some people appreciate nature and natural process, and in fact are tied with it, while others are in opposition? And why is it our culture is so avid about destroying ecosystems at all costs to make a profit, whether it's mining or grazing or timber operations or whatever it is? We're pretty destructive creatures. And the Native Americans seem to have a spiritual relationship with the land, whereas our culture has an aggressive utilitarian approach to land management. And it's in opposition to protection of natural process that I started off with this talk with. Well, he said, we're going to have to change our whole priority system, the way we think and the way we do things. He said, we need to install meditation, mindfulness, and exercise diet, and an integration with nature. And I'm going to tell you right now, so I don't have to repeat this. I don't want to repeat that whole litany of things, but each of those items that I mentioned there have an impact on what I call integrative neurophysiology. And when you take a walk in nature, it changes your whole attitude. When you eat the right food, it'll help change your attitude. When you meditate, it'll take you to depths that will change your conscious awareness. When you're mindful, your attention is held on a specific issue. So these are all different levels, but nature is a really important part of that. It elicits the same response that meditation does. And
what is that response? Describe your experience.
Well, I'm going to work now.
Okay,
with that in mind, I'm going to work.
I'm going to the punchline.
All right.
Okay.
So Dr. Salk said we need to install this in a larger population. We need to install it as a part of a movement moving ahead. And I think that there's a lot more people today that use yoga, meditation. They eat differently. They have a respect for nature. It doesn't seem like it, but I think if you go into your community, you'll find more and more that people appreciate this. I have people that talk to me all the time about this sort of thing now that were against me then. Now they say, we're glad you did it. We have a place to go. We'd like to get away from the rat race, and you provided it. And I have my wife and I have a trail named after us, and they say, we use your trail every day. And so it's interesting. Now,
Literally and figuratively.
what's that? Literally and figurative, correct? Yes. Okay, so in the early 70s at MIT, there was a individual, and you may know him, John Kabat-Zinn, and he was a biologist, and he used meditation and used mindfulness to solve problems with stress physiology. And he set up mindfulness stress reduction clinics around the United States and around the world. There are about 700 of them today, where he uses meditation and mindfulness to act on stress problems and reduce that problem. He uses it in businesses, hospitals, schools, throughout society. So he's moving that along, and he's doing pretty well. Now, at Johns Hopkins, there was a great woman there that worked for NIH. Her name was Candace Pert. And her research is, boy, it's pretty top-notch, pretty incredible. With her work, they're finding that meditation and mindfulness and everything else I talked about tends to lead to integrative neurophysiology, which is the relationship between the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system. And that ties that all together. And the biosynthesis that comes out of that leads to health and wellness, a sense of well-being, compassion, altruism, empathy, higher levels of consciousness, and higher levels of interconnectedness. Now, she calls this the two things. One of them she calls psychoneuroimmunology, and the other one psychoneuroendocrinology. The two of them together formulate the integrative neurophysiology. Now, there's a lot of work being done on neuroplasticity at the University of Wisconsin by a guy named Davidson. He's got the Dalai Lama working with him on this, and some of his people that come from Tibet that have meditated for years and years. And they find that meditation and mindfulness change the structure and function of the mind, of the brain, and it leads to different connectivity, different connections, different structure, different function. And the idea, the interesting thing is that the brain used to be looked at as hardwired. That's not true anymore. They've proved that that's just not true. So meditation and mindfulness lead to that from the outside, and the mind itself can change the brain from the inside. So thought process can change the brain. Meditation and mindfulness can move from the outside to change the brain. So the connectivity is all different. There's a guy named Hagelin too that's working on this. He works on the concept of consciousness and the concept of the unified field theory in physics and the string theory. It's tying that all together, which is pretty interesting. I think it's beyond this discussion, but we could talk about it sometime maybe. But at any rate, that's where Einstein and where scientists like Einstein and psychiatrists and psychologists kind of come together, which is interesting. But at any rate, the work done on that part is pretty interesting to know. You can see, you can feel, follow this through kind of, and then you get to the University of Pennsylvania where they're doing work on doing functional MRI studies on meditation while people are in the state of meditation, and they can look at the functional and structural changes as they meditate. The change in circulation patterns, the parietal lobes are they go quiet, whereas the frontal lobes of especially in the prefrontal lobe of the brain, is very active. So quiescence in the parietal lobes, very much activity in the frontal lobes, and the circulation patterns change as you meditate. Well, now I'm going to move to an area that I've kind of coined a couple of terms I'm going to throw out there as I move into this. I talked about psychoneuroimmunology, psychoneuroendocrinology. I think that I'm going to talk about psychoneurosociology and psychoneuroecology, which is what I've looked on I've tried to research that. I can't find it, so I'm going to say it. My cat's at the door. He wants to hear more about this. So anyway, perception is your reality. Perception is made up of beliefs and values, thoughts and actions, attitudes, awareness, and consciousness. Consciousness is a big deal. It's a big deal in all of this because it's a connector. So perception has a sensory input system, a processing system, and a motor output system. So when you see something, you hear something, you taste something, you smell something, that's a sensory input. You interpret it with your brain and you act on it. And your actions may be good or bad, depending on the circumstances. Now, as you raise the level of consciousness, let me hold on. I'm going to back up a second. There are several areas that I want to talk about with respect to this, the sensory input system, the motor sensory system. There's the anthropocentric view of the world that many people have, where humans are the center of the world. They're the most important thing. And that goes all the way from narcissism to Mother Teresa and racism and everything else. So you've got all kinds of binds in that anthropocentric, which is a social part of this. Then you move to the biocentric, where you incorporate all forms of life, including human. People see that as equivalent. One form of life, you get rid of that speciesism by looking at it that way. And then you go to the ecocentrism, where you start looking at land and abiotic factors and biotic factors coming together, which is the reality of ecosystems and biomes that make up the planet. And then you go to the planetary, where you've got a self-regulating system, a homeostatic health regulating system that maintains life. And then you go to the universal transcendent. So these are the different areas. So as you meditate and you change the level of consciousness, and you live, and these are all, this that I've talked about are all levels of integration. Levels of integration, because you move from one to the next, you can incorporate ones to the next as you evolve. You incorporate one level to the next as you evolve. So with conscious raises in consciousness and attitude, the sensory input level, you get a rise in the levels of integration within that sensory input system to the processing system. And this is carried by the motor system to the outside where you're going to act on it. And so your relationship with other people, your relationship with other species, your relationship with living systems in the planet change as consciousness changes. Then as you meditate, you transcend thought. You transcend thought as when you meditate. And you may start out not notice it, but later on you'll notice it. I've been doing this for over 50 years, so I can tell you from experience, it's powerful.
Mike, just spend a couple minutes describing that experience of transcending and shifting consciousness. What does that feel like, and how does that?
Now it goes, I can go back to what I said about integrative neurophysiology and talk about that level of well-being.
Just your sense of
serenity
experience. Your personal experience of meditation and mindfulness. What does that process feel like?
Well, it stabilizes you. It takes away anxiety. And I didn't get into anxiety because I didn't have time to do that. But that's remember I talked about stress physiology. It removes that anxiety and stress. You get into a bad situation, sometimes you can't handle it, right? But if you're meditating and you're meditating regularly, you can handle some of these things a lot better than you could without them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And do you use that? Have you used that in your practice of medicine? So for
yes, I have. I've meditated before difficult surgeries and things like that. I've done that. And also, I'll tell you another thing I didn't mention. If you have pets, that are close to you, and you really love those pets, they will help alleviate tension more than being around humans will sometimes. Now, that's just my experience. With humans, you've got a little bit of confrontation, a little bit, subliminal confrontation. You don't do that with pets. They don't, animals don't hold great grudges, and you can do bad things to animals and they'll come and they'll still love you. I've seen that in medicine so many times. I've seen that with clients.
And do you feel like when you are in the presence of, animal family or other animals, from the consciousness perspective, are you feeling like you're moving into resonance? In other words, their presence sort of is a sort of a push or a move to the meditative state?
Their push or move is to a more mindfulness state. A meditative state drops you down to a whole nother level because you transcend thought. You transcend thought in meditation. But animals can lead to a very strong feeling of well-being and security. Very strong feeling. When I see an animal, I feel happy. Unless it's a German Shepherd trying to take my leg off. But I had German Shepherds, so I don't have anything against German Shepherds, but they're pretty aggressive sometimes.
Interaction of leg and dog.
What's that?
Just the interaction between leg and dog.
But yeah, interaction between dog. So anyway, with this in mind, your relationship with this, with all this is cyclic. So you go back to meditate, and you again will raise your level of awareness and your level of integration within this system. And as you raise that level of integration within that system through a change in consciousness, you will start to, if you're a person who, this is for somebody that never, that was definitely anthropocentric, couldn't work outside that anthropocentric field. And if they really transcend and they incorporate this, they'll start to incorporate the biocentric, and they'll start to incorporate the ecocentric, and they'll start to incorporate the planetary, and they'll keep meditating, and they'll just keep, this thing will keep like it just get like a snowball. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, you're one with, you're one with all. I mean, you can get to that point. I'm not there yet, but I mean, there are people that are at that point. You know, there are. And, you know, in history, they were there, and they are there today. So this is an interesting system. So I say that as you move along, if you, with your relationship with humanity, you cannot do harm to humanity, not if you're connected. You cannot do harm to living systems, not if you're connected. You cannot do harm to the environment, not if you're connected. You cannot do harm to the planet, not if you're connected. And with all these connections, when you put them back and look at them, the way you treat that is the way you treat yourself, because you're the object and observer are coming together. The object and the observer come together and form a unification. And I look at the world today. We can right now in this group, we can move away from war. I hate to fund military efforts to destroy everything. The other people, the land, the planet. I mean, you look at what we've done. I mean, Teller thought the hydrogen bomb was a good idea. Well, I think if we took all that effort and all that money and everything else and moved it in a new direction, we could get away from materialism. We could get away from consumerism. We could get away from a continual growth economic system and go to a steady state economic system. When you get a chance to look at steady state economics compared to growth-oriented economics, and you compare those two, you can see where it would be extremely advantageous to move in that direction. But it's very hard. There are a few countries that have moved in that direction, but not totally. But the United States sure isn't one of them. And you look at the Port of Long Beach, and you look at those freighters that are coming in there with all this stuff for consumers, and that stuff comes out of the earth somewhere. So I say, let's develop the inside, the inner development, and not so much of this stuff on the outside.
So is that your, before we move in, because I know people have questions they want to ask you, is that what you would suggest is a sort of a summary take-home message, is starting from the inside and to basically work with the outside? What would you say is that relationship?
I'm going to move forward into an area right now that's going to kind of answer that, and then we can talk about it more. Is that okay? Okay, so I'm going to talk about ethics and morals. Ethics and morals. All right, so as you develop this psychoneural ecology that I call it, and psychoneural sociology, and you really, this process that I talked about with perception and reality and all that sort of thing. That's true top of the integrative neurophysiology. And and consciousness is a big part of that, because consciousness is part of spirituality, and spirituality shows a connection to a universal force, and it guides you. You've got consciousness in you, and the consciousness of the universe is part of the unified field, and I didn't talk about, but Hagelin and some of these people talk about it because they're string theorists, and I'm not. I'm not a physicist. I'm a veterinarian biologist, but it ties together. And Carl Jung and I'm sure Carl Jung and Einstein had some discussions, because physics and metaphysics and quantum mechanics and quantum physics all tie together with this whole thing of consciousness. Okay, so now when you meditate, when you start, if you're a meditator and you're a mindfulness person, your morality is gonna be different than other people, but your morality will tend to influence more people around you. As you influence people around you, it will raise the level of ethical standards in society. So ethical standards follow the morality of individuals and groups, because there's a difference. If you put them on a scale where you could look at them, you'd find morality is much different than ethical standards. The way morality is more higher, and it's higher, and it's a paradigm shift, is what it is. For example, you look at people like Martin Luther King, you look at Gandhi, you look at Rachel Carson and what she did, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama. These are the obvious people that have the high moral standards that pull the rest of society up. But you look around the community, there's a lot of people like that in the community. They're just unsung heroes, is what I call them, because I've run into a lot of them. And they're non-meditators, meditators. They're just a higher level thinker, and you know who they are, and you know that they exist, and so I'm going to say if you don't meditate now, I highly recommend that you look into it, and if you have a moment or two to do something, I think meditating twice a day is a very good idea. Once a day is better than nothing, for sure. And as you meditate, you will see you'll change. I'm gonna say this: you walk out at night and look up at the stars before you go to bed, and your attitude, your mindfulness, when you look up at that star, up at that universe, you'll feel a change inside you when you look at those stars out there. You think of infinity. You think about infinity, you think about universal consciousness, you think about cosmic consciousness. It brings light to a whole different realm when you do that. And when you go to buy something in the store or buy anything, don't buy what you want, buy what you need. Because when you buy what you want, you're stripping the earth. You're really taking things apart. And as you go through this thing I just talked about with perception and sensory input and motor and all that, and neuro integration and integrative neurophysiology and all that sort of thing, your beliefs and your values are going to shift. You're going to notice that. What your beliefs and values are today won't be the same. What your thoughts and actions are going to be different. And when you buy something, what you thought was essential today is going to be different tomorrow. And so when you I think, you know, I think that we can shift the paradigm within ourselves. We can shift the paradigm in ourselves, and that will lead to shifting the paradigm outside ourselves, because your contact with other people is going to be all important. It's going to be all important. And there are some people that'll pick up on this and some that won't. That's just the way it goes. And there are some people that are ready to go to meditate. There are some people that I couldn't get them to meditate if I handed it to them with a $10 bill. They wouldn't want to start. There's a feeling about it. And you almost know who's going to do this. You know people that well. You know the individuals that will and won't. But if we begin to change the paradigm in ourselves, then I think we can move toward incorporation of the anthropocentric, the biocentric, the ecocentric, the planetary, and the transcendent. And we can become a part of evolutionary biology and integrative neurophysiology. So I say evolutionary biology and integrative neurophysiology are one and the same. And that is where you begin to develop the inner self, and you tend to leave this idea of materialistic priorities and consumerism, and we're going to have to deal with human population. That's one that's beyond me. I don't know how you do it. Where the population for optimal health of the planet is probably around 3 billion, and we're at 8. So, you know, there's a time lag behind when something happens, or between the what's going on and what's going to happen come together. You can see it with climate. You can see it with mass extinction. You can see it with things coming along. So we want to be able to deal with that kind of stuff. And we want to be able to help prevent it if we can. But you know, once extinction is there, extinction's forever. It isn't like you can bring that back. So you got to shift an ecosystem. You shift the ecosystem, you exceed the limits of tolerance in the system, then you're going to get a shift in adaptation. We don't get it. I'm not going to get into that now, but it's
Well, I think you're a perfect example of what the shift in one person can do with the amazing restoration work that you've done, let alone the countless animals and their human family members. So
I think if you support life and living systems, you're going in the right direction. If you tend to follow invention and discovery have to follow with natural process. If you exceed the limits of tolerance in nature with discovery and technology, you better change the system, because it's not going to last too long. It might last, you know, before you stick the key in the ignition of a car, think about, do you really need to do that, or do you have to do it? And so needs and wants. Everybody likes to drive the car, but there's a lot of ramifications when you get in the car and stick the key in the ignition. I don't care, and really, when you start looking at electric cars versus fossil fuel cars, electric cars, it's just trading one problem for another. You're still going to be digging lithium out of the earth somewhere and all these rare earths to run these electric cars, and you're still going to get the same amount of problem on the highways. So we need to really start thinking about a whole new system, a whole new way to live. That's why I say internal development. You start meditating, you won't need all that stuff. You do have to, and your diet. The less you eat carnivorous type diet, the better it's going to be for the earth. And it's better it's going to be for the animals. The better it's going to be for the wildlife. There are more domestic animals today than there are wild animals. So, we've really shifted the whole system around. And I probably better leave it at that, or I'll exceed my limits by too far.
Well, we do have, thank you so much. It's absolutely amazing. We do have some comments and questions that we want to make sure to get in. So
Sure.
thank you so much. I'm just going to read one here from Isabella. I love that, supporting living systems. She hails from the UK. And this wonderful woman named Mary Watkins.
Oh,
What a beautiful and wise presentation, Mike. What you have been able to integrate and embody in your life is truly remarkable and very inspiring. I learn more each time that I get the chance to learn from you. And then there's a couple questions from Ed. Ed, do you want to just unmute and ask your questions? Because you've got a couple here.
Yes, I wanted mainly, Mike, to ask you to elaborate on the factor you mentioned only once of empathy, and particularly eco-empathy with other species and indeed with the natural world itself. Could you say more about what that empathic tie consists in? I think the term empathy was not idle. You were right to mention it, but I'd like to hear more about how you see human empathy toward the natural world, including animals and plants and the planet, plays out, especially as it's brought out through meditative practices. It's a question of elaboration, not of.
Okay. And yeah. We can have a discussion too on this because it's pretty interesting. Right. Empathy comes back to the interrelationship between the object and the observer, and the ability to experience the object the same as you experience yourself. If you can empathize with another individual and understand the situation that they're in, and you can come to realize, come to experience their experience in your own mind, then you can come together with them. And let's say you're in a situation where you're directly in contact with somebody like that, and you can experience what they're experiencing, and you can try to move in a positive direction with them. That will be to their benefit. Now, when you look at what we're doing on this international border, for example, to the south of us, which you're very familiar with, and you see it every day. If you can't empathize with those people that are trying to get across that border, if you can't understand why they're going to cross that border, then you're never going to be able to communicate truly with those people. Those people are experiencing hardships that we don't even understand. So if you can understand what they're going through and you can empathize with that, you can become an asset rather than a liability. And sometimes when you get politicians involved in it, it becomes a liability rather than an asset, because there's no feeling, there's no empathy, there's no care, there's no point of intercommunication. You just let it go at that, and it's beyond their capability to deal with. But when you can empathize, you become one with them. Does that make sense or not?
Oh, yes, definitely. I just wanted to add here, there's a couple more comments from Elka. Your philosophy is right on and full of wisdom. This message needs to go everywhere. Thank you so much. And then Izzy from UK adds, she did also make a comment, Ed did, about eco empathy. Izzy says, I love this. Ava Meyer, who's from the Netherlands, writes, quoting Simone Weil, to get to know other animals, we need to move beyond our own motivations and actually pay attention to theirs. To pay attention means not immediately trying to understand them, but from our perspective, but rather taking the time to look at them till the light suddenly dawns. That sounds very resonant with what you've been saying, Mike.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And as you move through levels of integration, you incorporate with them as you move. And that depends on consciousness. Consciousness, that connection with the spiritual is very important. I think that there's a spiritual connection that Native Americans have with the earth that we don't, but I think we're developing that. Spirituality and consciousness moves the level of consciousness to a higher level. And every time you meditate, you experience consciousness. And when you move through the levels of integration, you integrate more and more with other people, with the life and with the land. You incorporate all that as you move toward planetary incorporation.
Oh, thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to turn this over to Olivia, and if there's any more questions, and it was just beautiful. This is exactly what the title of our series has been, and it's been very deep and very broad. So thank you so much.
Well, I very much appreciated the opportunity to talk about this, and I think I want to work on. I know I talked to Ed about this. I'd like to work on that concept of the psychoecology and the psychosociology, because I think that psychoneuroecology and psychoneurosociology could be important in the future.
Yeah, our next speaker, and Olivia, we'll just mention him briefly, is going to be talking about, it's Leslie Sponsell from University of Hawaii, and he's going to be talking about spiritual ecology. So Olivia, I'll let you take it over.
Sure. Yes. It looks like Isabella has her hand raised. Do you want to add something, Isabella, before we wrap up?
Sorry, Olivia. Sorry, Gay.
No
I just
problem.
wanted to ask Ed. I feel a bit embarrassed because I feel very close to animals, but I've started feeling very close to trees, and I feel like they communicate with me. Am I mad, or do you think that in my sitting with trees and just being with them and meditating with them, that there can be something that's coming to me from trees? I really do feel mad asking this.
Oh, let me talk about this for a minute. You're absolutely correct on that. You take you go up into have you ever been in the redwoods?
No, I'm in England, and but so it's well, there's a particular poplar tree who's dying at the moment that I feel close to, but also oak trees. Just oak trees I feel very close to oak trees.
Well, there's an oak tree in England that's 900 years old.
There's one, yeah. They are phenomenal. There's a hollow one near me that I can actually sit inside. And that tree actually told me that it was the guardian. So it feels like it.
Well, anytime you're in a natural area, those trees and all living things, and trees are really important with respect to this. They change your whole physiology. Your whole integrative neurophysiology changes when you're around trees. So your interrelationship with trees is absolutely spot on. It's incredible. And also when you see what really upsets me is when I see people damaging trees. I can't take that very well. you don't want to look for negative things, but you can get a real feel for trees when you look at what they did to the pinyon pine over on the pinyon mesas in the Southwest United States. That is criminal to look at that. And when you look at that and you feel like you do, it'll be just like somebody coming and killing your family.
Yeah.
It's that strong. It really is.
Yeah.
So don't ever feel that there's something wrong because you feel that way about trees, because it's really critically important.
Thank you.
I
Thank
just
you,
guess that maybe
Bella.
this was mentioned, but Ed has a new book coming out about plants or trees and place.
When's it coming out, Ed? Oh, you're muted, Ed. You're muted.
Coming out at the end of the year. It's about the very specific way by which plants, including trees, have their own sense of place, not only through their root system, but indeed they're ramified being in the world. And it tries to trace this out in some detail. So yeah, it's called Plants in Place. That'll be the title of this book, which will appear, I hope, next fall or late in 2023. So it's all inspired by your good work, I must say. Really, Mike, for me, as for Mary and for many, you have been and continue to be a major inspiration. And I thank you for that gift that is unique and uniquely timely today.
I appreciate that, Ed, a lot. But, I'll be interested to let me know when you get that out. I'd like to. Did you know the over story by Powers? Have you read
Yes.
the
Yes.
story by Powers? Yeah, that's
Yes.
yeah. That's
Yes. I draw upon that. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
You
Ed,
know
you're
what
going to
was-
be traveling to the continent. Izzy, I'll put you guys in touch so if you can connect to the trees.
That would be good. Good to talk about this further. When you get a chance, you go up to the redwood forest and stay in that forest alone for a little bit. Just for your own, that's a real experience. But the oaks, the oaks are amazing in England,
They are truly wonderful, and I have to go to the redwood forest. The trees are just. I feel my soul. What you were saying about that integrative state in the meditation, I feel everything just. The egoic me is emptied out, and I am the world, but not in a sort of egoic individualistic sense. Just I can let go of all of that grasping human stuff and just be in the cleanest sense, and that's what I feel most deeply with trees.
Well, that could be discussed a lot more. I see you got your cat there, Neil. That's a good cat, isn't it?
Hey, Mike, can I tell you something?
Yeah.
Man, I wish I would have known you when I was working at the Wild Animal Park.
Oh,
Can you imagine you and me sitting around having conversations?
that would have been interesting. I can't imagine. I never have seen an elephant mistreated, and you described that. I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
When
And
I was a veterinarian there, I wouldn't let it happen. So,
well, Mary just died yesterday.
oh, is that right?
Yeah, she was 59. Yeah,
Oh man.
at the zoo. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And well, she was transferred from the Wild Animal Park to bring in the Swazi group that came in.
Oh, boy.
And she died in the wild. So you and I would have had a really good time. Nobody knows our stories. You and I could sit down for probably 20 or probably how many hours and talk about the zoo and talk about the park. Huh?
Zoos are a lot different than the wild areas, that's for sure.
Well, we're
I
going
know,
to
you
have
know,
to have,
wild.
it sounds like we're going to have another session, Mike, with plants and elephants and everyone together. So
Well, you know, I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service when we did sea otter transplants. That was quite a story. We transplanted sea otters from Manchitka Island over to St. George Island, southeast Alaska. They're amazing little creatures. and fur seals and orcas and everything.
Well, definitely we'll have to have another session. Our dear Olivia is under the weather, and so we have to allow her to be able to go back to sleep. So, but thank you so much.
All
Thank
right.
you so much,
Well,
everyone. Thank you
to
so much,
everyone.
Mike. It was just phenomenal.
If you want to keep in touch, we'll all keep in touch, huh?
Thank you, Mike.
Now,
Great to see
all
you.
of you start meditating now. You don't already.
Well, it's certainly the inspiration for it.
All right.
Thank you so much, everybody. A week from today, we'll have Leslie on, like Gay said, to talk about all things spiritual ecology, religion, peace. And as always, if you do feel called to support Kurulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kurulos.org. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to be here with us, and for everybody for your engagement and your insightful questions. It's wonderful to be here with you all. So thank you so much.
Yeah, please join us next time to keep the conversation going. Thank you,
Yes.
Mike.
All right. Everybody take care now. Keep
All
up
right.
your health. Keep up your health now. Don't let
Thank you.
All right.
Good to see you all.
We'll see.
Bye.
Bye.